This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hey, labial lovers, welcome back. I've got an absolute doozy for you today, and I'm actually not sure how I'm possibly going to have time to fit in all of the questions that I have for this incredible guest, but I'm going to try my best because it's such an important topic, and I know everyone will be able to relate to this and glean a lot of value from it. So we're chatting about toxic and abusive relationships, the different shapes and forms that this can take, how this can look, how to spot toxic or abusive dynamics, the effect of this stuff on our brains, and how to recover from this particular brand of trauma and find a way back to a regulated nervous system, or to a regulated nervous system if we've never had one, which is the case with childhood trauma. So I've got Cody with me today, a brain scientist and entrepreneur. He's generously here to share his expertise and highly specialized wealth of knowledge with us. And he's the CEO and founder of Mind Brain Body Lab, a mental health AI company that helps survivors of abusive relationships and childhood trauma restore balance to their nervous system post-breakup without reliance on therapy or medication. His mission is to help 1 billion people to find happiness and purpose in their lives. Oof. And this is one of those moments where I just take stock and feel so grateful and fortunate that I get to chat with people like this doing such inspiring work, and that all of you lucky listeners get to benefit from these chats and have access to brilliant minds like Cody. So with that little bit of very earnest ass kissing, welcome, Cody. Pull up a quick cushion, get comfy. How you feeling, mate?
Good. I'm pumped. After having seen a couple of these live ones, I wish I was live, but Australia is a bit of a trek for me.
I know. One day it would be so dope to get to do more live in-person interviews. It'd be really, really cool. So maybe that's a goal for me one day.
Heck yeah, that'd be a fun goal.
Yeah.
I'm pumped to be here.
Sick. All right. Well, I guess first off, just to give a bit of context and lay the foundation for this chat, I'd love to hear from you, if you're comfortable sharing, what made you so passionate about this stuff, whether you've yourself experienced abusive relationships or childhood trauma that's kind of geared you towards a career in this field, or whether it's just been an interest of yours. And let us know a bit of your background.
For sure. So a lot of it started with just my interest in the brain and inflammation and trauma in the brain, if you will, and not trauma in the mental and emotional sense, but more like physical brain trauma, like concussions. So I played college basketball and I got 4 concussions myself. And then a lot of the research that was going on at my college was exercise science and neuroscience kind of collabing to kind of figure out blood markers for inflammation in the brain after physical trauma and stuff. And so I just got super interested in like trauma and how that affects the nervous system and the immune system, and how the nervous system reacts to like physical trauma. And then I started to realize that, mental and emotional trauma does something very similar, almost identical to physical trauma. And so that was super interesting to me. And then childhood was awesome, but I did have some struggles in relationships, abusive relationships and things like that later in life. Like I think it was like been almost 2 years now, or a year and a half now, where out of like my own struggle with an abusive relationship, and struggling with all of everything that had to do with abuse and complex PTSD and healing after that, dating again, breaking a trauma bond, like all these buzzwords or whatever, just experiencing that for myself while going through and trying to run companies and manage people and all sorts of stuff. So kind of all hit at once. And I was just like, holy crap, needing to take a big dose of my own medicine in relation to some of the stuff that I know and the research that I know. So that's where the initial passion came from. And then also with some of the work that I do on like social media and such, that was also kind of a big gap that I saw. There's a lot of people that like regurgitate the same thing over and over again on social media, which is like awesome. But what's the science behind these things? And that's my big, I love really looking at like neuroscience and like primary research and being able to translate and help apply that into actionable tools for the real world based on like hard science. So
amazing. Oh my God, I didn't realize it was so fresh, like a year and a half out from a toxic relationship. That is not that long. Like you are killing it, dude. That's impressive because it's a whole thing, and it dysregulates you to such a point that I'm kind of amazed you've managed to build such a successful business and have so many cool things going on. Were you in an abusive relationship while doing work around, because I know you've got the neuroscience background, but now you're really specializing in helping people recover from abusive relationships. Were you literally doing that work while in the relationship, and did that kind of help you recognize it sooner, or was it just like a big blind spot for you? Like, I'm so curious.
No, it's so interesting because I think about this all the time, because what we did was when I first started to create content, I love science. So we got a test. And so we did a whole month of testing when I first was like, I want to start to make content. And 1 week we did mindset stuff. Then the next week we did neuroscience stuff. Then the next week we did toxic relationships and abusive relationships. And then the next week we did like inspiration, and just tested and saw like what content hit. And the toxic relationships and abusive relationships and neuroscience psychology of those things blew up. And so there's a giant gap in there. And so then I started to go further down that rabbit hole in relation to research, and I went and got IFS training, or internal family system psychotherapy. I got trained in that, and went deeper down like trauma recovery and like looking at those things. And I, for real, was like, wait a minute.
Oh my God.
So, what's going on here? Like, some of these things were getting kind of close to home. And there would be times where, so the wild thing is that my ex-business partner was my ex.
Okay.
So we were doing these things together. And there were moments where we would film a skit that was, this is an abusive relationship, or this is an example of a toxic behavior, or this is narcissistic abuse, or this is X, Y, or Z, whatever. And we'd be doing a skit back and forth. And I would for real feel my like heart starting to beat, my nervous system spiking, and like, or my like sympathetic nervous system kind of spiking a little bit. I was just like the fight or flight type feeling. I'm just like, wait, what the hell is going on here? And that was a wild experience. And so that was definitely like eye-opening when I started to realize some of these types of things, where it's like, it was in the zone of, I don't know what I don't know. And it started to get into the zone of, I'm starting to know what I don't know. And realizing that. And then at the same time, just trying to run a company together, even outside of like someone emotionally stable or not, like it's just tough on a relationship in general. So, and there's plenty, I mean, my perspective is, this is like my perspective about for my own healing journey is like taking agency over what I can control and like how I contributed to what was going on and like the patterns inside of me that lead me into relationships like this. And that's a lot of the patterns and parts that I help people kind of navigate when I work with them. But really taking a look at those, and I've done tons of therapy and all sorts of stuff on being able to communicate more effectively and being able to set stronger boundaries and maintain my independence and have habits, patterns, routines that fill me up and like things like that really help me a lot. So that's been useful as well in the journey, in this realization of kind of what I was going through. So.
Whoa. Wow. That's fascinating. And like so fortunate that you did go down that rabbit hole and start kind of gathering information about it and therefore reflecting on your own relationship dynamics and kind of realizing, oh, holy shit, like I got to get the fuck out of here. This is not healthy. And I suppose, a little bit in some sort of sick, weird way, serendipitous, because it would make you so much better at your job and, you know, your ability to help people now would be massively increased having gone through it yourself, I suppose, because I think it's very tricky to like properly relate and be able to support people in these situations if you don't have an embodied experience of that and if you don't kind of understand just how complex and nuanced and irrational it is. Like, you know, when you're in those situations, your rational mind, and I hear this all the time, your rational mind can be like, I can now see that this is fucked and I know I need to get out and I know it's not, this is not okay behavior. I'm not happy, blah, blah, blah. But the actual, you know, getting out bit can be, you know, can feel completely impossible for people. And victims of toxic or abusive relationships get a lot of flack for being weak or being stupid for staying or for going back. And that's like one of the most kind of scary things about it is like they can really lose a lot of friends and family because they continue to be treated like this or go back to the relationship or stay in it or whatever. And people kind of get exhausted with trying to give advice that just doesn't get taken and trying to help and support a person who seems to not really be ready to be helped or supported or get out. And it's really scary because especially, you know, with narcissists, they love to isolate you from all of your support networks and kind of create so much like internalized gaslighting and self-doubt and self-worth issues that like, it can feel impossible to get out. And I'm wondering, like, in your experience since working with people in these situations, because I've noticed like it's rarely a one and done situation. Like often it's like a bit of a perpetuating cycle of drama or abuse that plays out on repeat and that people find very difficult to get out of and heal from, to the point where like, you know, they might have one relationship like this, but then they fall back into the same trap again in the next relationship. And like, what do you think that is? Like, what's creating that vulnerability to continue falling for the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. And this is where I really love blending neuroscience into the fold here, and neuroscience and internal family systems. Because to speak to what you were talking about a second ago, people go back, and like there's trauma bonds, and like we understand like trauma bonds more than neuroscience, but IFS conceptualizes people not as in, like just yourself, more as multiple parts. Your psyche has multiple parts. Just like if you think of like human body systems, okay? There are atoms. Atoms make up cells. Cells make up organs. A bunch of organs together create organ systems, like your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, right? Tons of organ systems together create you, right? Individual nerve cells bundle together to create neural networks. Neural networks create regions. Regions create your brain, right? And like, there are parts and they build up to the whole. And if you look literally everywhere, all over the place, that's exactly what happened. Like hydrogen atoms come together with water, or oxygen atoms come together to create H2O. Lots of H2O creates water. Lots of water creates a lake. and it builds up. And so your psyche is just the same. And so you're made of many parts. And that's a big thing in relation to IFS. So there is a part of you that wants to leave and knows you should leave and is very rational. But there's another part of you that's getting its emotional needs met and is soothed by being in the relationship and feels safe in the chaos. And so that's the piece. A lot of the times people come really rationally with, I want to do this, I want to do this. And a lot of people come to therapy or coaching, whatever, with they come as the part of them that wants the therapy. But there's almost always a part that says, well, I don't think I need this. I don't want to do this. We're fine or whatever. And that's the same type of dynamic that like it's called a polarization, where one part wants this and another part wants this. And almost everybody has felt this in some way, sometime in their life, or one part of them wants to kind of do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to go travel and be free and do all this kind of stuff. And then another part's like, well, I want to create a family and stability and routine. And it's like, we have all these polarizations. Like one part is super focused on the destination. Another part's like, well, I'm going to enjoy the journey. Right. And we stay stuck in these polarizations and we never identify them because there's usually one that's dominant. Like for me, I'm destination focused. Like I'm results focused. Let's get it done. Let's get this right. And the journey part kind of takes a back seat. Same thing that happens in these abusive dynamics, because the part that is like, wants to be in the relationship oftentimes wins out over the part that is like, we need to rationally get out. So that's for sure a piece of it. And that often stems from some type of trauma, especially childhood trauma, whether it's big T or little t, but attachment ruptures, especially where your mom and your dad left when you were young, or they died, or something like that happened where there was a big attachment rupture. And attachment ruptures is a specific type of trauma that I study the most because it's the most traumatic of all types of trauma. If you think about it, is attachment trauma, which means just a severing of attention, love, and affection, like the bonding that you have with the mom or a dad or an initial caregiver. And so that leaves scars, that leaves wounds that come, IFS calls them exiles, like these parts of you that get exiled. Like it's like shame, abandonment, rejection, these huge, big emotions that we want to shove down and exile away. And so we just have to take this part and like, you hold on to that big emotion. I'm going to shove you down and exile you away and not deal with you. However, those exiled emotions want another at bat. They want another chance to try and heal and recover and do it right this time. And so they drag you back into, subconsciously pull you into these abusive patterns and situations so they can get another at bat. If I treat this one differently, maybe they won't leave me like my dad, or they won't leave me like my mom, like whatever the dynamic was. And so they want to get another at bat. And so they pull you back into these relationships. And that's, I've got to be careful how I say this, my gripe with solving surface level problems. Like a lot of the times traditional talk therapy or these cognitive therapies are great, but they don't solve the root cause, which is that like stuck little child that's inside of you, that little part of you that's trying to heal, but it's doing it in the wrong way, trying to put you back in a situation, because that's the only way it'll ever learn how to heal is doing it right in that situation. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you can get to that part and do some of that parts work and that deeper work, you can solve that root cause and not be dragged into these unhealthy dynamics or pulled like a current towards these unhealthy relationships. That's kind of the IFS side. We can go to the neuroscience of trauma bonds in a second if you like, but I'll stop monologuing.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so much in there. I'm just like, oh wow. It kind of reminds me a little bit of shadow work. I suppose those emotions like shame and loneliness and the things that we reject or we exile, wind up having quite a bit of power. And I love how you described it as having a current that's just pulling us back in. And I kind of almost feel like, on one hand, if you've had that sort of attachment wound or childhood trauma earlier in life, it's like it almost feels I guess maybe it's a pretty loaded word, but it almost feels like some sort of addictive pattern where you're constantly like going back to this particular situation that's on one hand going to provide an opportunity to maybe get this like hole inside you filled with the love that was, taken away that you didn't get. But on the other hand, usually what wins out is it's also an opportunity to have all of your biggest fears and insecurities about being unlovable or, being abandoned fulfilled, because you're finding these situations that are going to just continue confirming that, or it's almost a bit of like negativity bias where we've got this like sick existential kink for like things that hurt us because we've almost become addicted to the drama cycle of that, and those feelings that we don't want to feel and that are being neglected or shoved down, those shadow sides, are just desperately trying to get their time in the sun again. And it's just, oh my God, it does my head in, because I feel like it's so tricky to get out of these cycles. Even like, I guess the first step is being aware of it and noticing these parts and noticing these patterns. And I feel like that's where I'm at. Like I can really, like, I'm very self-aware. I can really reflect on like, okay, these are the wounds and this is the trauma and these are the patterns and this is how this is all kind of resulting in this. But to actually unhook and like get myself out of that is a whole nother story. So would love to, learn more about internal family systems and like the strategies. But let's chat about the neuroscience side of this, because it's really fascinating stuff. And I think like a lot of it is happening without our awareness. And if we just kind of like shine a light on it and explain, like, because, so much of earlier on in life, if you've got certain trauma, it makes you more vulnerable to further trauma of a similar nature, because it's given you brain damage, basically. Like, it's really fucked with you neurologically. So let's maybe chat about that side of things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm happy to go back to the like intellectualizing of things that have happened to you as well in relation to IFS perspective. So, but in relation to the neuroscience, you are absolutely correct to say addicted, because it is an addiction cycle that people get stuck in and they just do not realize it.
Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
But when you're thinking about trauma bonding and what that really means when you break it down inside the brain, you're thinking you're some of the most powerful chemicals that we have. So when you're feeling let's start on the abuse side. So when you're in these abusive patterns, oftentimes what's happening is there's high stress abuse, which is cortisol, epinephrine, like your stress chemicals and neurohormones and things like that are getting released. You're in fight or flight mode. You're high stress. It's like, holy crap, this really sucks really bad. And so your brain then marks that with dopamine as well. People are like, oh, what do you mean dopamine? Dopamine is you want to remember to not go near that again or stay away from that type of thing. So there's some dopamine that's released. It's almost like that pleasurable feeling you get in a way. But it's really, people forget that dopamine is more about movement towards than it is just straight pleasure necessarily. So there's some dopamine that's laid down in relation to stress, because it's like, okay, I need to remember that a tiger is over across the pond to get the berries, but if I go through the forest, there's no tiger. So I need to remember that. And so it drives you try to move you away from the pain. On the other side, though, is if you look at like the common abuse cycle or whatever that happens, is there's like love bombing. And so what starts to happen is you have this big knockout, drag out, like trauma response or abuse response, cortisol, epinephrine, all the stuff. And then things you kiss, you make up, you have the makeup sex, like the love bombing where they're taking you on big trips, they're giving you big gifts, all the stuff. Lots of, guess what? Oxytocin, serotonin, like dosing more dopamine, anandamides, endorphins, all of these like super, super really good feeling type things. So really high highs, really low lows. Thing that people don't talk about a lot is that oxytocin erases negative memories. Right? It's why parent or moms want to have kids multiple times, It's traumatic to have a child, but there's so much oxytocin released when you have a kid that it helps you blunt the pain and forget. And so when people go back, and people external to them get frustrated, like, how could you go back? They're so mean and so abusive. The abused does not remember that. They are only remembering and thinking about the high highs a lot of the times. And that's why it takes 7-8 times a lot of times for them to truly get away. Or the even scarier thing is a more intense level of abuse that is scarier. Okay. And so what I have found a lot of the times is before I get there, to just finish this out, so you have the super high, which you lay down some dopamine because you want pleasure. So you lay down some more dopamine, and the dopamine on either side of the pleasure and the pain is a classic addiction cycle, like literally. So if you look at the brains of someone who has complex PTSD after an abusive relationship, domestic violence, things like that, and then you look at someone who's addicted to cocaine, very similar brains, very similar like activation patterns, very similar behaviors, withdrawal, all these types of things that start to happen when you are going through this cycle. And so breaking a trauma bond is truly breaking an addiction cycle. Yeah. It's the same thing. And there is withdrawal, and there is anxiety, and there is all these worse things get worse before they get better type of thing, just like with most addictions. And the scary part, just like with most drugs of abuse, if you will, or things that you get addicted to, the negative has to get a lot worse for it to like really, really hit home a lot of the times. Like most people are scared of the unknown more than they're scared of the familiar hell type of thing. Yeah. And I find that a lot in abusive relationships. It's like, well, if I leave, the fear of the unknown is scarier than I can predict the scary behavior of this person now. I'm familiar and used to that. Yeah. And so a lot of times it takes an extraordinary jump in. Like maybe it's a verbal abuse and it becomes physical for the first time, or maybe it is been physical, but now it's getting more dangerous, like with like weapons and different things like that. And it takes that, or kids become involved, God forbid. And it takes that next intense level. And that is really scary in domestic violence situations as well, because that escalation happens so quickly and is generally extraordinarily dangerous. And so there's tons of sad stories in this space, but that extraordinary increase oftentimes is what allows people to kind of get out or realize and come to the realization like, oh my God, I see what everyone's been saying, and it clicks finally, because now the fear of the unknown is less scary than what's currently happening to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess it's similar in a lot of ways to an addictive pattern, but something that just popped out in my mind is like, as someone who has supported people in these situations and could see it a mile off, like it's easy to see from the outside when you're not in it and you're not the one trauma bonded. And the really frustrating thing is like, you can see what needs to be done. They need to get out. You can kind of see what's going on. But for the life of you, there's nothing you can fucking do generally until it has literally gotten so bad that they've hit rock bottom and they can come to that realization themselves. And it's kind of similar with like substance abuse addictions. Like they really have to hit rock bottom on their own before, like no intervention will really work until they've kind of hit the lowest of lows, or there's something quite extreme or shocking to jolt them, out of that cycle enough, hopefully, to kind of put some steps in place. And yeah, it's kind of like that with abusive relationships, and it's just absolutely devastating and infuriating and frustrating and so difficult to see someone in that dynamic suffering, and maybe they're not even fully aware yet. They're, might be at different stages of the kind of like awakening to the reality. Yeah. And even once they've kind of awakened to that, like preparing to leave and putting the things in place that need to happen. And it's such a hard thing being someone on the outside trying to figure out how to support them best. And I'd love to hear your kind of take on this, because I've been in this situation a lot of times. I've spoken to a lot of people in this situation where they want to help and they want to get this person out, or they want to help this person see the light or see the reality of what's going on. But in doing so, in trying to, open their eyes or push them towards action, you're kind of pushing them further away, and that's kind of playing into the narrative, especially if if they're with a narcissist or someone who's quite manipulative. That's just playing into their narrative that they can use against you and further isolate that person from their support network. And so it's like sometimes doing none of the things that you intuitively want to do, like grab them and shake them and scream and be like, get the fuck out of here, this is not okay. Like none of that will actually be very productive or effective. You just kind of need to be there and wait until they figure out. I mean, well, I'm not even sure. I'm often like, fuck, could I be doing something better? Like, what would be the best way to tackle this? So I'm really curious to hear if you've got some strategies for those who have a family member or a friend that are in an abusive relationship, whether that's, physically abusive or all the other different forms of domestic violence, which don't have to be physical. How can we best support these people? And is it counterproductive to try to show them what's going on? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, the hard part is, well, first and foremost, what I'll say is safety is number one. Like if you feel like they are not safe, absolutely let the correct people know, which is depending where you're at. In the United States, there's tons of hotlines that you can call, domestic violence hotlines, like 911. Like there's so many different resources and things for just straight up safety and just helping them understand and have those at the ready if need be. Just that's in the extreme case, kind of like just keep this in mind. Yeah. Outside of that, being able to, there's a couple things you do. First and foremost, shame doesn't ever generally work. And the hard part is you might be too close to the situation to, like, can't be a prophet in your own town, right? And so it's like being able to try to find third-party ways, like not to like self-promote or whatever, but I've had so many people that DM me and say, I have had my brother or sister has been sending me your videos for like 3 weeks now, or 3 months now, or 6 weeks or whatever. And I'm starting to think that I'm in an abusive relationship and what do I do now? And they kind of have that realization because it's really hard. People don't believe anything you tell them. They believe 50% of what someone else tells them, and they believe 100% of what they tell themselves. And so to get to that 50% where it's like they believe what someone else is telling them, sometimes it's that insinuation. It's you yourself being there in complete support and love. And it's really kind of that little sneaky like, hey, check out this video. Or, oh my God, I just read this really interesting book about psychology. I think you'd be interested in this. And it's that like subtle, like putting stuff out there type of things and information out there that I can say it's effective because so many people reach out to me saying that's how they kind of realized it and came to that realization a little bit. That's one. And then the last piece is the shame part. Like the worst thing that you can do is shame someone and shake them and yell at them and things like that, because you got to remember that, like, imagine that there's a little child, like literally 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old version of them that wants to stay in the relationship. And they are just sitting there waiting for you to get mad and like say you shouldn't do that. And it seems counterintuitive, but really sitting there and try to listen, understand, validate, like show them some attention, care, and affection, and be like, oh, okay, let's say that you do stay, okay, like, and that's okay. If you do stay, it's okay. I understand, no worries at all, and don't shame them for that, because it's just going to be counterintuitive. And then when they need help and they don't feel safe, they're going to feel like they have nobody. To do some of the switching of their beliefs and working with that part of them, I would recommend getting them to see if you can get them in front of someone that can kind of help them understand and start to flip that belief in their own mind. If they get that 50% where they're starting to question, someone who's really good, like an IFS or SE or somebody who's really good at some of this stuff, can really help them start to see themselves for who they are and show some compassion towards themselves and really love up that part that wants to go back or that wants to stay in the relationship and help that part feel safe, because that part is attached to an abuser right now, but that part can learn to be attached to that person internally. And that's the problem. Right now they're going external for safety, but they can develop safety internally and attach with themselves as opposed to having to attach to someone else for safety and love, attention, validation, and things like that. The last piece of what I just said is better for a trained professional. Would not recommend trying to do that with friends. But everything before that you could do.
Yeah, I love that. And that's kind of been over the last few years, that's kind of been my strategy, is just sending like links to blog posts or podcasts and creating these resources for people, because it often does need to come from somebody other than you because you're too close to it. And if it comes from a stranger on the internet, especially like one with a profession or expertise that's kind of got a bit of credibility, it's going to hold more weight, and it's going to be a gentler way of kind of opening their eyes to certain concepts or potential realities that, me going in like a real blunt object is not going to be able to achieve. Because like I really struggle with not, like, I'm almost like, I'm just so, sometimes I suspect I'm on the spectrum because I'm like autistically honest sometimes, and it's like so not the best way to go in these situations. I'm just not subtle. I really struggle to be subtle when I'm seeing something. I just want to call it out. So I've had to really work on that for myself and be like, cool, that's not going to work. And I'm also not going to be a safe space for this person when they do come to the realization that they need some support. So yeah, just kind of really reeling it back has been like a challenge for me, but something that I'm pretty aware of these days, because yeah, you want to be their first port of call, and you want to be a safe space. You don't want them to feel like you're judging them or shaming them because you think they're an idiot for staying, which is what they're kind of getting a lot from a lot of angles. Generally, people don't have, or society doesn't have, heaps of sympathy for like the one that stays, because it's like, oh, well, they're kind of bringing it on themselves. And I think that that's just such an untrauma informed way of looking at it. So I love what you said about just like really being subtle and kind of.
The other thing too is one of the best things you could do is focus on yourself and your own healing and be a positive example and influence for like becoming the type of person you'd want them to become. Because in you doing that, and them, like, brains learn through observation and reflection more than anything. Since we're children, that's how we learn best. And so focusing in and becoming a positive influence and a shining light for the type of healing in life that you want them to experience is honestly one of the best ways. That hurt people, but heal people, heal people. And you don't even have to do anything in relation to heal them or fix them. Because a lot of the times people want them to change their behavior because they're trying to get an emotional need met in themselves. I want them to heal because subconsciously I know I need to do something similar, or there's an area of my life that I don't want to focus on. So I'm going to focus on them externally as opposed to turning internal. Doing a U-turn is what they call it in IFS, and really examining your own parts that are at play and working with those parts in you, and then showing up differently for your friend. And showing up differently for your friend in a healed way is, again, one of the best ways. It's just infectious. Like, it's infectious.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And definitely leading by example, can never go wrong. Like when you're doing the work for yourself. And yeah, I just always remind myself, like, all right, like, how can I be the safest possible space for this person? And that's probably not by telling them the truth at all. It's by trying to sneak some veggies into their dinner like you do with children, and just like send certain resources their way, or talk about a book that I'm reading that's really interesting, or, using an example from my life or what I'm realizing about a certain relationship I've had or whatever. Because that's like a much more roundabout and subtle way of slowly kind of introducing some ideas and info for them. So yeah, I love that. And definitely your all your social media content's so great for that. Like, it's bite size, it's really like relatable, kind of practical little tidbits. So people should definitely go and check that out. And I know multiple friends of mine have kind of come to the realization that they're in an abusive relationship with a narcissist through me sending them little reels and podcasts, some of your stuff, some of other people's stuff. It definitely seems to be a more palatable way to kind of introduce that information, and they're a lot more like receptive to it that way. So yeah, I've learned that the hard way in the past, kind of going in a bit too hot. But I'd love to do the segment Get Pregnant and Die before we jump back into some more questions. Do you have a story about your sex ed that you could share with us?
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
Sure. Yeah, I was sex ed for me was wild. Because I grew up Catholic, so I grew up. I'm sure you hear
Oh
this all the
lordy.
time, but yeah,
Okay.
I know. But my sex education was just wild. Like it was the hardest part. It was mostly about what not to do, and very shame, guilt,
Yeah.
fear ridden type of stuff. Like, and so the biggest thing for me was in relation to like anything sexual, whether it was like literally sex, masturbation, porn, any of that kind of stuff. There was just a lot of shame, guilt, and fear that was laced into it. And so one of the like craziest, wildest things that I look back on now, I'm just like, how, like I've worked on this in therapy. I'm just like, how was this something that happened to me and was like good in the eyes of like certain organizations or whatever. But I just remember that I used to, like, if I saw a boob in a freaking TV show or something, I would just stay, I couldn't fall asleep until the next day so I could go to confession and get the mortal sin off my soul so that I didn't, because if you die with a mortal sin on your soul, you go to hell. I literally just would think that over and over again. So there's little me that was just sitting there like so concerned about anything in relation to sexuality that like it was just wild. So it was really like less a sex education story and more like a sex, or I guess it kind of is, but I wish more of it was actually sex education, not just sex, fear, shaming, and guilting. It was more like actually educating me on what's going on and the science behind things. So that would be, that's probably my story.
That is so horrific. And like, I wish I hadn't heard so many stories like this, but it's, especially in the States, like it's pretty intense. Like I didn't have a religious upbringing and there's a lot less of that there. It exists, but there's less of that in Australia. I mean, sex ed is absolutely dismal and there's definitely a lot of like Catholic schools and Christian schools and stuff that, you know, do the abstinence stuff. And, but that I just feel like, from an outsider perspective, someone who hasn't been brought up religiously, it just seems like viciously unethical and traumatic to put like, what the fuck? Like, and what age were you? Yeah, like literally, like you couldn't sleep because you thought you were going to hell because you'd accidentally seen a boob on TV, and that it was a sin to, like, how did your relationship with your body and your penis and like sexual energy wind up at like when you started going through puberty, and like at what age did you realize like, you know, you weren't going to hell? But how did you get out of this?
Honestly, I mean, it took a while. I was pretty freaking indoctrinated for a long time. Like it feels like people that escape cults almost, which is kind of like bad to say or whatever in a way, because I think there are some positive things that come from like religious upbringing and different things like that. I don't think it's all bad. Like there's no absolutes, but I mean, it took a while. I mean, it's honestly still something I work on in therapy today, even. Like these are things and conversations that I have with my therapist, even still today, as I'm trying to process and work through some of these types of things. So I don't even think that I have fully come to like a healthy perspective around sex, like sexuality and things like that. I'm not where I want to be necessarily, where it's guilt-free, shame-free. I still have those reactions about things like I'm doing something wrong or I'm doing something bad or I shouldn't be doing this, like shoulding and shame and things like that. But I got like in college, around college-ish time, where I was really just more free to do what I wanted, and I like didn't have to go to church if I didn't want to. I didn't have to do these things. Like I was just more free to explore and test and like do things. I started to at least be able to follow my curiosity and feel okay with that and just be like, okay, but it still felt like wrong in some way or shameful in some way. And that was still hard to beat. And it's interesting now too, because maybe it's not religion, but there's a lot of people that, especially for men, like there's like, don't watch porn, do watch porn, don't masturbate, do masturbate. Like, and it's just like still just another version of a bearded dude in the clouds telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And so it's defining that for myself. I'm honestly still on the journey of figuring some of that stuff out. specifically for myself and working through some of like the shame and the guilt and some of that stuff
Totally.
in relation to those things. So
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing. It's big stuff, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that I work with clients on the reg, because it's a real indoctrination, and it gets in there when you're pretty young and vulnerable, and when your sexual identity is forming, and it's so damaging. It's just like layer upon layer upon layer of like a lot of little T trauma, as that's still coming at us with the sort of shame and stigma around sexuality. So, I mean, that's why I'm passionate about what I do. And it's pretty much an ongoing journey because you're trying to remove all of the shame and stigma and fear mongering that went on, in the religious upbringing. And then also there's just like daily reminders and layers, that your sexuality is not okay, basically, like still in our society. So it's a lot. But I'm glad to hear that you're actively like delving into that sort of stuff in therapy because it's very worth it. And I imagine that the way that all of that sort of like fear and shaming around sex like behaves in our brains and our nervous systems is quite similar to other forms of trauma. So it's kind of all related to what we're talking about as well. Like I feel like, yeah, religion obviously there can be some positives, but it can also feel like an abusive relationship and kind of have a hold on us that is kind of reminiscent of that. So, so interesting. Okay, there's so many, I'm just like conscious of time and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many different things I want to talk about. I love that you touched on attachment theory and memory and how, all of this is very relevant. I'm wondering if there's also any like kind of telltale signs or, I don't know, I was about to say tics, but, just like things like behavioral things, maybe signs, day-to-day signs that like we have a bit of a traumatized brain and that we are operating from a dysregulated space. Like, are there things that we might not have noticed that we just think are normal because that's our baseline, but it's actually a result of, chronic stress, lots of, layers of trauma. Just go nuts. Whatever feels relevant to talk about. Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff like that you can kind of think about because IFS kind of thinks about trauma is in a less like 90% of people have some type of trauma, right? And so there are more innocuous things than you would imagine in relation to like what could potentially be stemming from some type of trauma. And I very much believe that most things stem from some type of bigger little t trauma in general. So even things as simple as like people pleasing can be as super like innocuous, like, oh yeah, I just kind of people please, but that can stem from some type of trauma bonding or trauma that occurred to you. Empaths is another one, a really common one that I see. Hypervigilance in relation to like that one's a little bit more obvious, like when you like jump or startle super easily. A lot of similar or a lot of things like that can be forms of telltale signs that you might be struggling with some type of underlying trauma or something like that. If you think about your nervous system, there's tons of things that you can start to I'm very passionate about this piece because you can measure your nervous system more than you think. But there's something called your HRV that you can look at. And if you have if you've done all the health things you possibly can, and you still have your heart rate variability, that's super low, and you just can't seem to figure out how to do that. It's a measurement of stress, underlying stress or whatever is what your HRV is. Heart rate variability is what it stands for. Most, like a Whoop device, an Apple Watch, Oura Rings, like Garmin watch, so many people measure it now because it's such a great indicator of stress. And it's what I use with my clients to help objectively measure mental and emotional health. That's another really innocuous sign that, okay, there might be some deeper stuff that I'm struggling with in relation to stored trauma and just underlying stress, constant underlying stress. If you're constantly getting burnt out, like there's a binge burnout cycle that people kind of go in and get stuck in. That's another sign of some things that you might be stuck in. If you're constantly kind of going from this like dissociated, numb, depressed, hopeless, like shut down state to this rage, panic, fear, anxiety, irritation type of state or whatever, and you're just fluctuating between those two states, that's a pretty large sign of nervous system dysregulation, especially because you're just constantly in a freeze state or a fight or flight state, and you don't ever truly get back down to like your parasympathetic, like rest and digest, calm, cool, collected state. Those are some really big indicators in relation to kind of what's going on. Any types of addictions, and I'm even talking like self-harm, like things like that can be a form of addiction, dissociation, anger, rage, binge shopping, like things like that, alcohol. These are like firefighters that you're causing you to state change, to react and distract you away from some underlying thing. What is the underlying thing? That's like the question of the year. Having an inner critic, having an achiever, having an intellectualizer where you have to rationalize everything and make sense of everything and figure it out. Those can be signs of something that's going on. Not every single thing of these is tied to trauma, obviously, but there's just a lot of individual signs, and every nervous system has billions and billions, trillions, 1,000 trillion synapses in every single brain. Like that is insanely large. Like it would take 36 million years to count to that number. And that complexity is in each and every brain and nervous system. And that's just the nerve cells or the synapses. Yeah. So it's wild. And so there's a lot of diversity in things that can happen, but it's really about the system and starting to notice the system of things, not just one thing. Like if you get rejected, and you start to rage and get pissed off, and then the next morning you wake up and there's a critic that's beating the shit out of the part of you that rage. Like, I can't believe you yell. You embarrassed us. You look terrible. Right now you yourself are putting another part of you in the shame cycle, and that shame cycle just dysregulates this part, which causes it to react. Which, like, it's a cycle of things. It's not just these things in like their own individual little spots. They all connect with one another in a system, and that's the interesting and a really good awareness hack. Because you then can triangulate to, okay, so I got pissed off, I got really mad. Or sorry, I beat the shit out of myself. Why did I do that? Oh, because I got mad. Okay, why? What happened here? What was going on here? Tell me more. If you didn't get mad, Mr. or Miss part of me, if you didn't get mad, what are you afraid would happen? Oh, well, then shame and rejection would escape, and you would have a shame attack, and it would take you over, and you would die. And like, oh, okay, got it. And how old do you think I am? Well, you're 4 or 5. Well, wait a minute. What if I told you I was like 28 now? Wait, you're 28? I've been doing this job for that long? Yeah, and what if I told you that I have a therapist now, and I like actually have a great support system, and I have new tools and resources, and you can actually take a break, Mr. Anger and Rage. Like you can start to talk to that part of you, and it's like, whoa, I had no idea. Like, and then it's like, and I can actually handle that shame and rage now, and I can go rescue it. Would that help you? Yeah, that would help me a lot. Great, let's do that. And so it's starting to figure out some of those types of things and the patterns, and then being able to get to the root cause, as opposed to going to anger management. What's that going to do except give you tools to cope? So many people come to me and they've rationalized and intellectualized every single freaking pattern. They know that, yeah, this was legacy trauma for my mom, and this was the thing for my dad, and then this pattern is here. And I'm like, it's very interesting that you can explain and rationalize all these things. You've had 5 different therapists in the last 3 months, but none of them helped you. Tell me more about that. Like, what's going on here? Like, do you think if you stopped rationalizing and started like actually being here with your parts, something would change? And That's a big difference as opposed to coming with an agenda and just trying to heal. So those are a lot of the different triggers or indicators, and then how to triangulate on what's actually going on in relation to those indicators.
Yeah, and I guess because the intellectualizing and overanalyzing is a really common thing. I fall into that trap. I have a lot of clients that do that, and it's good to be self-aware. But what would you suggest instead? Like you said, being with those parts. So like acknowledging them, feeling compassion for them, allowing them to be there. Like, what are some practical ways we can actually just diffuse how much power they have over us, and that we're acting out from this place of a 4 or 5 year old who's like traumatized and lonely, and actually kind of reintegrate these parts and nurture them so that we're feeling a little bit more whole. Like, is that the kind of strategy that's mostly involved in internal family systems? I haven't really done much of that stuff.
Yeah, you're dead on. Especially this rationalizer, intellectualizer part, the first step is awareness, like you're saying, and then naming it. That helped me a ton because I have an extraordinarily strong intellectualizer, rationalizer that keeps me safe a ton. Like I have an extraordinarily strong one, which helps me a lot and is amazing. And there are no bad parts. This intellectualizer is not bad. Like even suicide and suicide ideation is not bad, and that is a part of you that feels that way. And I work with people on that all the time. And I'm the first person that ever comes to them and says, oh, it makes sense that you as a 3 or 4 year old would feel that way. Because as a 3 or 4 year old, you do not realize, and I'm answering your question with an example, because this is what you do with these parts. I'm just giving a very extreme example. But even a part as extreme as suicide, if you go to that part and you ask it, like, and you just listen to it, like, what's your intention for me? What do you hope for me? And it's like, well, I want to keep you safe. I want to protect you. I want to make sure that you're okay. And remembering that it is 3 or 4 years old. So even something as intense as suicide, like a 3 or 4 year old doesn't have the brain development yet to understand that suicide means non-existence. It means that it does not understand that you will be gone. And so to a 3 or 4 year old, that makes complete sense as a solution to pain. Okay. And so when you realize that this part of you that is this like ugly, gross thing that you want to go away and that you hate, like anxiety is another one that I just want to go away. I hate it. I don't want to be around it. Well, if you were talking to a child, your friend's child, and you all of a sudden started saying, I hate you. Like, you suck so bad. Just go away. Like, leave me alone. That kid would start to cry and throw a giant big tantrum. And that's exactly what anxiety is doing when it grabs your shoulders and squeezes the shit out of you and then like gives you a migraine. It's the same thing. It's throwing a tantrum because it wants your attention. It wants attention, love, and affection. And so by giving these parts and going with compassion and curiosity to these parts and bringing yourself, the internal parent, to these parts of you and being curious and compassionate, you'll get so much further because the resistance will stop. Like, there will be no more push and pull. You'll just be like bringing love to it. And that is a huge, huge, huge help. And all of a sudden that part becomes more open because if I am curious with you, to change your opinion on something, it's far better if I'm curious and seek to understand your position, right? You're more likely to then, if I give an like a different solution, you're way more likely to at least even take a look at what I'm suggesting. If I have spent 50 minutes of a 60-minute session understanding and validating and really getting to know you at your core, because at that point, there's no way that I would suggest something without that understanding, because I've sat there with no agenda. And that's the biggest thing. People go with these agendas like, I want this to go away. I want to fix this. And that agenda is what gets in the way of really true healing and helping these parts like get to know you and love you. And so that would be naming them, getting to know them, coming to them with curiosity, compassion without an agenda can be super helpful. And find them in your body. That's the other thing too. They're always in your body somewhere. And they usually hang out in the same spot in your body. So if you just take a second, focus, find it in your body, and just focus your attention on that part and just see what comes up. Picture, sounds, taste, smells, movies, images, whatever. It's different for everybody, colors. And then just see who are you? What part are you? Or if you're searching for a specific part, What's your intention for me? What's your hope for me? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't do your job? And just asking some of these questions can really help it feel understood and validated.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love that you brought that somatic piece in because, you have this neuroscience background, but there's nothing is in isolation. And that somatic, like body-based feeling part is so important and tied in. I'm like something that I've always struggled with because I haven't done internal family systems specifically, but there's a lot of modalities that involve similar types of methods with that. And, the kind of common advice of like, don't try and avoid the negative, quote unquote, negative feeling. Really just acknowledge it, feel it, sit with it, see where it is in your body, like go into it, like have a big old hang out with it. And I have no problem with doing that. My worry is like, I'm with like the negativity bias of like being really focused on, the worst case scenario and the bad stuff as a survival mechanism. And then like living, as a lot of us do with like so much stress and negative thinking patterns that have turned into like chronic depressive or anxiety conditions after just years of nervous system dysregulation, multiple layers of trauma without any modeling of how to manage this. I always worry that like then giving it more airtime and like sitting and feeling all the like quote unquote negative stuff could be leading my neural pathways to like become so deeply furrowed to those negative kind of emotions and feelings and the depression and things like that through like repetition and like the neuroplasticity is kind of like I'm like freaking out that it's working against me and that I'm really solidifying the neural pathways that I don't want to be solidifying, and then therefore it's harder and harder to get out of those and create and strengthen positive ones. So I'm always in this like torn place where I'm like, okay, well I know that like the theory is like you got to like feel the feelings and be in it and but like what if I'm just re-solidifying and cementing those neural pathways to like more negative ways of thinking and more stress and more depression, like asking for a friend, obviously.
No, this is so beautiful because I talk about this all the time, because what you're describing is re-traumatization, and that is being in the feeling and fully like being in it and associating inside of it. What I'm talking about with IFS is an observation of this part of you that is struggling to where you're not in the feeling. And it's not, IFS calls it blended. You're not blended with the emotion where you are feeling the anxiety and the panic and all that kind of stuff, or whatever the trauma response may be, where you get stuck in it. And the other concept in IFS is something called self. And so the concept of self is, and why I love IFS so much, is that it's not about, in the framing that you just articulated, which is like makes a lot of sense, is there's a therapist and then there's the client. And what's happening in the client, the therapist is responsible for making sure bad stuff doesn't happen, right? And their safety and stuff. And the healing mechanism in that dynamic is the therapist. In IFS, the healing mechanism is actually the self. And everybody has a self, which is the most you that you can be. It's like the core, it's the seat of your consciousness. It's like the deepest version of you. It's calm. There's the 8 C's and the 5 P's that kind of help explain what it is, but it's the curious, it's calm, it's compassionate, it's clear, connected, confident, persistent, playful, patient, like it has perspective, it's completely present. And that's the healing mechanism in IFS. And it's like an internal parent. It's like the internal leader. And that is what is healing, doing the healing in IFS. And so in IFS, you don't, as the therapist or coach or whatever, or practitioner, you're not responsible for your client's healing. Their self is. And you're really there to help bring some self-energy, because self-energy is like a spark. And when you bring self-energy, it lights the self-energy inside of them and helps them kind of see what that looks like. And they can mirror that, but they are healing themselves. And the beautiful thing about self, because what you're describing is one of the biggest fears about trauma work, is I will become overwhelmed. If I let this part out, I'll become overwhelmed. I won't ever stop crying. I want to kill myself. I want to have a panic attack or whatever. And the thing about it is that the self is invincible. Like it can handle anything. And so when people start to realize, it's that uncontrollable feeling or experience, but that does not happen. And in fact, if it wants help, it's not in its best interest to overwhelm you, because if it overwhelms you, you couldn't actually help rescue it. And so when you give it that hope, and it's like, hey, I love you, buddy. If you overwhelm me, I can't help you. I want to be close to you and help you. Would that be cool with you if you just took a couple steps back and unblend for me? Because this is you and this is that part when it blends with you. Can you just step back so I can see you and really be with you? And never, ever, ever in thousands of sessions have I had someone, when you ask a part to unblend a little bit so that you can help it, it doesn't listen because it's just not in its best interest. And so there's a very, very big difference in observing these traumatized parts with the self and bringing healing energy towards that part and observing it and being with it. That big difference than re-experiencing and re-traumatizing yourself without that healing mechanism and just hoping your therapist can help you deal with whatever's going on. It's a huge difference. So I'm glad that you asked that question, because that's a very, very common thing.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I often have clients just saying like, I'm too afraid to like let myself cry or fully go there because I'm afraid I'll never stop crying and I will drown and I will never be able to get back out of that hole if I let myself fall down into that pit. So it's a really common fear. I feel it myself at times. So yeah, it's beautiful to like differentiate between because I think that's what I have been doing in the past, is like totally re-traumatizing myself by trying to follow this advice of like, don't try to sever yourself off from those emotions just because they're uncomfortable. Like, give them space, give them compassion, feel them fully. But I think I don't have a problem feeling things fully. I already feel things way, way, way more fully than probably a lot of people. And so in trying to give them more space and airtime, I probably am like going way too deeply into it and identifying with it too much and then kind of re-traumatizing myself. So it's good to like have a bit of clarity around the difference between that and just de-blending.
Well, and staying stuck too, because that's the other piece. In a lot of trauma therapies, they'll have you go scream it out in a pillow, but they're not helping you rescue the part that's stuck. Because what happens inside trauma is that you get stuck in a trauma loop. And trauma is like gravity. It holds that part down in that loop. So you're watching your dad leave when you're young, or you're getting beat up, or something bad is happening, and you're just stuck in that trauma loop. And then throughout your entire life, every time something that matches that pattern happens again, it's just adding to the trauma loop. And so that part of you just stays stuck, getting worse and worse and worse and bigger and bigger and bigger, so that when you do let it out, there's a big eruption of stuff that comes out. And so what happens is people go and they do this cry it out on top of a mountain type stuff, and it's awesome. Yeah. And they get into the emotion, but then they leave it in that trauma loop. And so then all it's doing is cycling back through like a GIF that just plays over and over and over and over again. So you do some of the releasing and feel seen, heard, validated. That's amazing. Love it. But then you put it back into a little box and it stays in its little loop, and it just starts to store that emotion more and more and more and more because it's stuck. In IFS, there's an exile release process that allows you to actually pull that exile out of that trauma loop, pull it through a threshold, bring it into the present with you, and then take that burden. It's called an unburdening is what it's called. And because it's holding on to this big, scary burden. And the feeling that I'll never be able to fully let go of that burden is really that overwhelming, it will never go away, because there's never been hope that they could do something different. But in IFS, you can go to that part and bring it out of that trauma loop and bring it into the present, or bring it. I've had people bring stuff. They want to go to a space station. They want to go to the beach. They want to go like into a forest. Like they want to go on top of a mountain, wherever they want to go. You just teleport them there and bring this young part with you, and then help it release that trauma. And this is obviously something that you should definitely be doing with someone who's trained in this, just to be clear. But you can ask it, okay, what do you want to let go of, and how do you want to let go of it? And some people are like, I want to burn it with fire. I want to let it float into the air. I want to wash it away with water. I want to have lightning zap it out of my body. And you unburden that and release that burden. And I literally have seen people that are hunched like this, just like open up, and their whole back pops when they're like unburden this. And then, okay, what did you lose when you took on this burden? And every freaking time they're like, I love and curiosity and playfulness. And there are these constant themes of just like children. Like, I want to color, I want to play, I want to explore, I want to do all these different things. And I was like, great, let's bring those back in, and let's bring in the things that you want because you just released. you just left lots of space. Let's bring in the positive things you want, and then you can reintegrate that into your system, having healed it and pulled it out of its traumatic space. So if you go re-experience it but leave it there, it's just going to like go through that trauma loop over and over again, and just continue to build that burden and build up until it needs to be released again. Whereas if you pull it completely out and fully heal it and then reintegrate it, completely different. And oftentimes it's bringing wisdom to you that you didn't even know you had. Because these traumatized parts like get looped down like this. And I like to imagine that they're inside of what they're holding. There's a gem. There's a jewel inside of what they're holding. It's like the deepest wisdom you could ever find. And when they're able to open up and release, that wisdom comes out. And you're just like, wow, I feel like a different person. So that's like the end of, or the last thought I have on like being scared of releasing stuff.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I always, I'm not a visual person, so all the modalities like Gestalt therapy and these sorts of things where you're doing visual processes or guided visualizations to kind of find the thing and pull it out and do the, I really struggle with them, and I'm wondering if there's some other strategies like nervous system regulation techniques or something like that we can kind of suggest for people who either don't have access to a therapist or have the resources to hire someone right now, but maybe want to start doing a few little practical things themselves to help regulate their nervous system post-breakup or in preparation to leave a toxic relationship.
For sure. Dr. Ramani just wrote a book. She's awesome. I would highly recommend reading that book. That's a great resource. Simple. No Bad Parts by Dr. Schwartz is another great book. That is super, super helpful. Dr. Ramani also has an amazing YouTube channel where she does tons of completely free content. Obviously, we do tons of free content as well on all the social media platforms that can be super, super helpful. I also have a free trauma release guide for post-breakup it's the link in my bio in literally any of my social medias, and it's completely free. And there's like over 50 or 60 different nervous system regulation tools inside of that. All like from polyvagal theory, from how ice baths can help you, from what nutrition and supplements you could be taking to help bring down inflammation in your nervous system, to exercises, because exercise is interesting because it actually increases inflammation. And so there's some specific types of exercises that can help you with like actually getting the benefit without increasing like too much cortisol and things like that. There's sleep hacks. There's humming. There's meals to cook. There's so many things inside of that can be super helpful as well. Because I get this question all the time. So I just add to it all the time too. So I just put everything all in one spot as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, beautiful. I know there's so many good practical things nowadays. I fall into the trap of being really overwhelmed by it all and not knowing which, because habit forming is so difficult, especially when you are working with complex trauma. But yeah, even if you can just choose like one or two things and just start doing those, it's absolutely better than nothing. I'm just looking at the time. I'm like, oh my God, I've got like 15 other questions I was going to ask. I don't know what I was thinking trying to fit all of this in, but I love that you mentioned polyvagal theory as well. There's lots of different kind of like bodies of work that are all very interconnected. So people should definitely go and do some research and check out Cody's content. But I'm wondering if you can just leave us with a little TMI story, because we haven't actually done that segment yet. I know I'm pushing it for time, but do you have a story that would usually be considered too much information for general consumption that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
I guess there's one in relationship sex, one that's wild that people are like, no freaking way. But I didn't lose my virginity until my second semester in college. That's how intense the sexual shame and things like that from like religion and all that kind of stuff was. So that.
How old would that be?
18 or 19.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It was a
That's
wild
not
time.
that wild. It's the age is getting. I mean, yeah, I'm meeting a lot of people who haven't had sex in their 20s, mid 20s, and I mean, yeah, that's tricky because there's also this mounting pressure, the peer pressure, the like feeling of shame that you haven't done it, and the fear around just such a big build up to it. Was it a positive experience when you did finally have
Yeah.
intercourse. Oh, okay. Well, that's good at least.
Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, the person I hooked up with for the first time, it was a great time. I mean, like very like nurturing, like here's showing me the ropes type of stuff. Like it was a pretty good experience or whatever. So that was cool. It's just wild. Like, and I don't generally talk about that a ton. So, I mean, that would be one. The mental health side, when I started having panic attacks, that was the biggest thing for me. When I just got to such a state of, because I'm like the nervous system regulation dude. Like I wear an anxiety like necklace at all times or whatever. But in relation to like when I first started having panic attacks, that was just like a big moment where I was just like trying to run a startup and raise money for a startup. I was in a toxic relationship. And then one of my best friends was struggling with some mental health challenges himself. And I lived with them. And so it just, all of these things were happening once. I just had a panic attack for the first time. And I was just like freaking out. I went over to, the only place I could go, because I didn't even know what was happening to me. I had to go to my girlfriend's place. And I was just like, my heart was beating, like the whole thing. And I was just like, what is happening? This has never happened to me before. And I just had gotten to such a state of high stress that like I had whiteness, I had white in my beard coming in. Like it was insane that I had gotten that high nervous system wise. And it's just vulnerable, I guess, to talk about in relation, because I'm generally helping people with these types of things. But it is because I have personal experience, absolutely a personal experience with them.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
Yeah, which is actually such an asset. But I get that feeling of, imposter syndrome that can come through when you're like, surely I should know better. This is my shit. This is the stuff I'm supporting people with, like as if this is happening to me. But I think that's generally a pretty big asset to you as a practitioner and someone that supports people. But yeah, that's so intense. It feels like you're literally dying. I've only had maybe 1 or 2 panic attacks, and I just didn't know what it was because I just had no experience with that. And I was like, what the fuck is happening to me? And it's terrifying. It's just the worst thing. So yeah, that sounds so intense, and I appreciate you sharing about
The other
that.
one I just thought about in relation, this is kind of funny, but TMI for sure, is that I mentioned that I got out of that relationship like a year ago, and I just recently started dating again seriously in like the last couple months probably. And in that relationship, we hadn't had sex for like the last 6 months or whatever of the relationship, because it just wasn't, we just didn't or whatever. So by the time I started dating again, not only had it been like 4.5 years almost since I had my first date. That was wild. But the thing that messed me up was like, damn, dude, there was a part of me that was like anxious about having sex again with someone new. Because it was like, did I forget how to do this? And there was just like, will I know what to do? Will like it work right? Did what I do in the last relationship for like 4 years, is that what everybody does? Like, and like, I just had all of this intense anxiety around this, like having sex again or whatever, as I started dating again. And that was something I worked with my therapist on. I was just like a lot more than I like, I don't know. It's just wild to think about it, but that's That's definitely one. That's a better one. That's the best one probably so far. And
Oh,
it turned
I'm
out
so
fine.
relatable.
Everything's cool now.
Okay. Okay, cool. Good to know. That was going to be my follow-up question. How did you
Yeah.
go? Because it's a big fucking deal. It's a really big deal. And it is. It's like very anxiety inducing when you haven't been with a new person for many years. And, after an abusive relationship, your confidence isn't the best either. And potentially, yeah, I mean, you're carrying all this. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's my jam. I love that stuff. I love helping people with that stuff and talking about it. So I'm glad you shared that one. And I'm glad it went well and you're back on the horse and back in the, the dating world. But yeah, it's definitely a pretty confronting time when you start getting that anxiety, because like sexual anxiety and performance anxiety is like, one of the number one things that can actually make the experience turn out exactly how you don't want it to, especially if you have a penis, because erections are very responsive to stress and your nervous system. So I'm glad that you managed to, come out on top.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that is interesting. I had an experience with that recently as well, because I was in a rush. I was trying to hook up with somebody and we were in a rush. It's somebody I've been talking to for a while or whatever. And for the first moment, I was like having like a semi, like my heart was beating, like a panicky type feeling. And I was just like, yeah, it's not listening to me is what I literally said to this person. And luckily she's an extraordinarily chill and like compassionate human. So it was like all cool. But yeah, that was wild. I hadn't had that happen to me ever before either. And I was just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's another TMI story.
Yeah. Love it. We just got like 4 for the price of 1. So good. Yeah. And all of your nervous system stuff and regulation stuff would be such an asset in the bedroom, because, our sexual functioning is so tied to our nervous system. And yeah, a lot of the things that I teach people around that are very nervous system based, because
Yes.
it's all, yeah. All right, beautiful. Well, I should let you go. I'm going to put links to your work in the show notes. But yeah, so appreciative for you sharing your time and your expertise. And I'd love to have you back on, because I have a surplus of questions that I didn't even get to. It's a big topic. I was being ambitious. But yeah, so lovely to chat, Cody.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Rock and roll.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraff_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraff.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.